Hey, hi Kelly. How are you today?
Hey, good morning, Penny. Happy Monday to you. Hope you had a restful weekend given the circumstances we're all living under.
Yeah, I did. I did. It was good. We are getting out to walk in the woods about an hour a day, so it's all
Yeah,
good.
we're
So, what
getting
are you
out of
thinking about today?
strangely this morning, or maybe not so strangely, I've been thinking about my young kids as readers. Um, with them being separated from us, I was thinking about, Dick Allington's work with summer reading loss and how he has, demonstrated that when kids are away for the summer, uh, that those kids who do not read fall further behind, and those kids who do read jump
Mhm.
further ahead, and that gap widens every single summer. Well, it's weird because summer reading loss is here now because the
Yeah.
kid
Yeah.
might potentially be here now. So the kids are not with us. When they're in class, we can confer and we can figure out who's reading and who's not reading. But I just feel a little bit disconcerted because I haven't had contact with my kids in a couple of weeks. The last couple of weeks, my district has said simply help them catch up with missing work. This week we're sitting in right now, I'm in spring break, so I actually will not connect with my kids until next Monday. But I'm thinking in terms of, I'm
Mm.
not thinking in terms of picking up 1984 where we left off. I'm not thinking in terms of giving them packet work. I'm thinking in terms of, have you stopped reading? And if so, can I get you back on the reading train? Something that we talk about all the time, the importance of volume.
Yeah.
um, I think uh, there's been sort of an anti-homework movement before all this happened. There's been sort of an anti-homework movement, but I would say as a secondary teacher, as a high school teacher, I'm not anti-homework. I'm anti-dumb homework. And one thing that we've always said is that kids have to read at home. If the only reading they do at school uh, is in school, that will never be enough reading for the kinds of thinking that we want to develop in our kids. Well, now there's no school. So I'm concerned that kids are not reading at home at all. And so I've been thinking this morning about ways of reconnecting with my kids as readers.
I'm really struck as I listen to you that this is a serious question because my daughter's first year teacher at home and she's having a hard time connecting with her kids, period, let alone if the kid's in between books or left that book at school that they were interested in and has no access, what you just said. Our kids are not going to the library right now. They're not, what if they don't have good stuff to read? But I think what one thing we want to talk about today is that what we do have control over during the school year.
Yes, and I'm posting some online resources for my kids. There's a lot of places now that are allowing you to download free books.
Mhm.
A lot of my kids do have books. They have independent reading books from my class that they've hopefully have in their
Yeah.
backpacks and took home with them. So I do think you're right. I think there's a danger when you say, that these 10 kids do not have access to books, so let's not have the other 20 kids read. I think it's really more about getting those 20 kids reading and then trying to figure out how we can get books in front of the 10 kids who are really, really struggling to find something to read.
Good
You
point.
know, maybe we could look at the slides that we've shared, and you have to move that over. Uh,
Thank you. That's this box that I got to move over. So these are some slides from our work that we've been presenting together.
And it started, this volume and reading thing started with this February edition of Educational Leadership, when we found that, kids today are, and this comes as no shock to anybody, but the kids today are really, really spending much of their time on social media, digital media. And some of that is reading, but it's not book reading. And book reading, as we know,
Mm.
creates sort of a cognitive benefit and a cognitive exercise that's very different than click and go reading. But even before this crisis, we're losing readers like crazy, I believe. I mean, wherever we go, right, Penny, we ask people how many of you are concerned your kids aren't reading. What's the response usually?
The entire room of hands.
Right. And it doesn't matter what region of the country. It doesn't even matter if we're out of the country. We live in a distraction addiction age, and kids have evolved away from
Yeah.
books. And so that was the problem before the crisis. And so
Yeah.
yeah, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, then we looked at this one.
right, which came out a few months later. And what we really liked in this one was Mike Schmoker's article about focusing on the essentials. If you don't know Schmoker, we're big fans. You might start with Focus. Focus is really, really a smart book. It's fun to see his thinking over time. It's really kind of evolved, but in some ways, it's really about the myriad of standards that we're drowning in has caused us to lose our focus, and really let's maintain our focus. So in that article, that was in that educational leadership. Go ahead and advance that one more slide. Schmoker makes the argument that students should be reading and or be read to for a minimum of 60 minutes daily across the curriculum at every grade level. Now, this is not just put on the backs of English teachers. This is when that kid walks into your school in a typical day and then walks out 6 hours later, an hour of that day should have been spent reading, and 40 minutes of that day, again across the curriculum, should have been spent writing. And what Schmoker says is that in such amounts, reading and writing would have a game-changing impact on all learning. And so this really comes back to that idea of volume and the importance of volume. And you and I have said this many times in workshops. We could teach every reading standard there is, but if kids don't start reading a lot more than they're currently reading, it probably will not matter. And so that was in September. And then Schmoker again came out again in educational leadership in February, and in which he's making the case here for minimalist literacy standards. Remember, Penny, when we sat down to write 180 days, we looked at your school district's guide to teaching ninth grade. How long was that guide?
101 pages, and they had got it from, I think, Boulder, Colorado. They got it from somewhere and sent it to all of us. Ooh, isn't this a perfect model? And I was like, 101 pages of standards and guidance and what to do. And I loved that he said, what are these minimalist literacy standards?
And what he argues is really if your school just focused on these 5 standards. Number 1, how many grade level knowledge rich books kids have read. Number 2, chart the number of pages. Number 3, the number and approximate length, and I like this idea of inquiry-based discussions of text per week. Getting kids to talk about their reading and their writing. Number 4 is to have a lot of low pressure, ungraded, formative, explore your thinking kind of writing. And then number 5, how many formal papers, a multi-paragraph, multi-page written assignments are your kids writing a year? Schmoker argues, and we agree, that if your school just focused on those 5 things, those 5 minimalist standards, you would see unbelievably interesting movement and growth in your young readers and writers. And so I was thinking about Schmoker and his thinking this morning when I got up and said, I wonder if my kids are reading and I wonder if my kids are writing right now. Now, having said that, I also would say you and I are supposed to be writing a book right now. How's your writing gone the last 10 days?
It's been tough. I mean, I told you that one afternoon I butt in chair, Don Murray's old advice, right? So I came and sat in my office and opened up the most recent piece I've been working on and talking to you about, and you'd filled it with comments. And I tried to just respond to those comments, but there was no cohesion. The biggest thing I noticed was that I would try to patch together things and then I'd reread it. And instead of doing the natural, ooh, this doesn't work, I got to move stuff around, I was like, I'm too tired. I can't work. And it's emotionally tired and writing. So one of the things I think is smart that you suggested this morning is that we record these later and put in our scheduled time to work on our book every morning, because that's when we usually write.
Yeah, I would say I haven't written really in 10 days or so, for much of the same reasons that you just mentioned. It's hard to be creative in the shadow of such an enormous thing that's happening in the world. And but I would just say this: I am starting to emerge from that, because that line we talked about the other day. How much of that world do you let in, and how much is too much? I've actually, just in the last day or two, just this last weekend, I've started to kind of return to my work a little bit as a way of keeping all of that at bay, and trying to maintain a sense of normalcy in a time that's not normal at all. And so on Twitter, for example, I had mentioned
Mm.
that I grabbed a set, and it's weird because it was a timed writing that we did in class, and my intention was that once they had the drafts, then we were going to come back and we were going to make it a process. I hadn't told the students this yet, but that I was going to return that time writing and give it to them to go through a process paper with. I find, and I know you probably do as well, that sometimes telling them it's an on-demand writing helps get them started. When if you just say it's a process paper, you have a number of kids who take a number of days to get started.
Mm.
But
Mm.
because of that, I physically had the papers, physically handwritten papers, and I found sort of a comfort in going back and reading their work. It was a good refuge from just endless, incessant worry that comes streaming through our devices and into our homes. Also made me miss the hell out of my kids.
Yeah. Yeah, there's a very real, I'm getting a lot of messages from former students, which I think is interesting. One thing you said that struck me when you were talking was that it's hard to be creative. And I don't think of the work on our book as creative as the work I do in my notebook. I was kind of wrestling with that as you were thinking aloud a little bit there, that I feel freer to be kind of loose and not controlled in my notebook, in a way that when I'm writing for our book, I feel this professional audience, and I feel the pressure to say something important that as you know, I often write in my notebook and then get it onto a document, because I have to have that freedom, that feeling.
Yeah. So help me understand your thinking here. I think I agree. This whole I'm writing something that's going to go into a book someday and it's going to be read by a professional audience someday creates a very different pressure on me. But I also, and I know this is not what you meant, but that is creative. That kind of writing is creative for me as well. That's very different than I'm just going to open my notebook and I know this is never going in a book somewhere, but this is more personal, which is what I have been keeping. That has actually been a easier thing for me to do. But to write professionally and to try to be smart and to try to, I don't know, it's such a difficult thing to do when all this stress going.
Exactly. So I think we're saying the same thing, because what you had said when you were talking was, I'm finding it hard to be creative. And I immediately went, oh, I'm not having a hard time being creative. I'm having a hard time writing
I should have
professional, even though
being
that is creative.
professionally creative, perhaps.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So maybe we should talk about what we're doing in our notebooks.
We should. Go ahead.
You want me to go first?
I can go first. Doesn't matter.
I know that we've been doing very different approaches, but when I come back on Monday with my kids, and I've mentioned that in this thread before, that I'm going to have them try to do some capturing of the events. And so I have been keeping my own documentation. I'm just going to scroll through a little bit and show you sort of the day-to-day stuff. And I am dating the dates in it. And just every single day trying to capture a new idea, a new twist, a new turn that's happening in the world. I want to document this in real time as it's happening in real time. And so I've been doing a lot of, sometimes some days like this weekend, I just wrote and wrote and wrote and wrote. Some days I'm doing kind of cut and pasting and kind of shorter thinking with it. But I'm just trying to keep track of, my thinking during this time. But I also think it's a little bit more than that. I think for me, putting
Mm,
that down in the book is a way for me to sort of manage the stress of what's happening. It kind of gives me control over
mm.
what I want to think about and read about and write about, and kind of, I don't know, it just sort of gives me a place to kind of park that thinking. And then when I'm done, I can kind of close it, and then I'll go out for a hike or do something each day as well. But it's kind of a place for me to park that thinking.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a lot in there that you said that was about self-care. And I had posted a tweet the other day that I was really kind of weary of rigor and standards. How do I keep the standards up? How do I keep the rigor up while they're at home? And then I really just wanted kids to write what this time was like for them. And then I immediately get people who, there's a bunch of yeah buts, oh, but the bigger thing was, oh, it's too traumatic for some again. And my idea of how you work in your notebook is not that you have to write about the coronavirus. I think that what is this time like for you? The invitations that we created for that document you sent out were about, what's it like at home right now? What's it like, we're at home with our spouses, and my daughter's here as well. And three people, it used to be fine in our house. And now sometimes it's like, I need some space. What is the time like does not mean you have to write about the virus. So I think that, as I told you, I'm processing it differently than you are. And I'm just going to show you some slides from my notebook. And the thing for me is that I'm going to put us down here this time, see if that helps, because we keep getting in the way. I have been, as usual, reading and writing a lot. I kind of write next to things I read. And this was on a poem I just posted from LitHub. This is an Italian woman. March the 9th, 2020 is the title of the poem. But there is gold, I believe, in this strange time. I love that line. And so I was thinking about when I first started writing, Don Murray sent me this book, Art and Fear. And he sent it to me because I kept giving him the yeah buts, but I don't write, and I don't, I can't. And his point was there are lots of people who write, and there are lots of people who say they're going to write, right? And that they all talk about talent, but it's not talent, it's discipline. It's those who sit down and do it who ever get anything done. So the same is true for me with art. So I started this weekend with this picture of a fish and decided I was going to sketch at my notebook because it's a free place. No one gets to see it but me. But the minute I sit down and go, I want to sketch that fish, I'm like, you can't do that. You're not an artist. You don't know how to do this. Doesn't matter if it's writing or art. And I just finished this weekend Writers and Lovers by Lily King, who wrote Euphoria, which is a brilliant book. We used it in our science book clubs at my high school, about Margaret Mead and anthropologists and a love triangle. But it was the Kirkus Award winner that year, National Book Critics Circle Award. But Writers and Lovers is brand new. And this is a book about a young waitress in Boston who's a writer trying to make it. And this quote about fear says it all to me. I mean, this is, how often do you and I feel the fear of looking like a fool for trying, right? That's anytime you put your work out in the world, you're like, oh, people are going to criticize this. So I thought about that, and I thought about this fish. And you can see kind of at the bottom of the page there, because the first thing I learned about sketching was that I needed good tools. That's where all those colored pencils come from. That's my left desk drawer and my right desk drawer, which is all cartridge pens. And then I have art cards, something I learned from Linda Reef, all in the second drawer on the right side, because I'll grab one and start trying to sketch what it is. And so I just took some pictures as I was working this weekend to show the process, because I do believe that when you only see products, you never believe you're going to be able to do it. And so that sense of proportion is the first lesson. Like, look at the big view, just try to get some things sketched. But then the second lesson for me was, as soon as I start working, I realize all the things I don't know, all the techniques I don't know. And what I have to do is remind myself that it's approximation. I'm creating my own fish, not her fish. And with that, I have piano music going on in the background. I have that stillness that settles on you in the trying, not in the product. And my husband drops off breakfast because he's the best. And
Wow.
I decided I wanted to draw some flies. I don't know why, but I Googled them on my phone and then sat there with my phone next to me and started adding flies into the quote from Lily King. And at this point is when I put down my third lesson or observation from this writing. And that is that when I let go and had the freedom to not draw her fish, but draw my own with all of its mistakes, I've got little arrows down there, all the mistakes I'm making. But that freedom that it was mine, I became more creative, more relaxed. And I went and dug through my files and found pictures of my dad and I fishing. That's my first Steely on the right. And then decided we were going to be flies. So I went back to what do flies look like and turned them into flies, the pictures. And now that's the first 2-page spread in my new notebook that I've just started. And it's for nobody. It's for me. I mean, it's hard to share this because then I just imagine other people going, yeah, I don't know why you're sharing that. That's not that great. But
Oh, no, 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 no,
that
no. Stop for a moment. Stop for a moment. What they're saying is, oh, no, 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 no. I can never, ever do that. And I'm actually thinking, oh, no, 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 no. I could never do that. But I could do my own version of that
right,
in my own notebook. I could draw like crap in my own notebook and no one's going to see it. Right.
right.
So I've often said your notebooks belong in the Smithsonian, but it doesn't mean that I can't make my own version that's as meaningful to me. Right.
Absolutely. And the whole point of why I showed that to you is that I'm back to rereading Sketch, which I adore because she's not an artist. And her entire book is about it's only practice. That's all that separates somebody who draws like an artist and someone who doesn't. And the practice
Show the
is
book.
you just
Show the book again.
Sketch, and I'll put it on our Padlet with the links. And I think what's really cool about this book is she talks about these sketches that are her 10 minutes a day practice, and then she'll show you one that is her hours
Wow.
of practice. Never had an art class beyond middle school, but she just sketched all the time. And it's 10 minutes a day of sketching. 10 minutes a day turns into, like me Saturday, I spent 3 hours playing with that stuff in my notebook. But the difference between someone who finds joy in practice and someone who is only practicing because they're forced to practice. And I think the truth is that's about reading and it's about writing. I've been doing this whole, I'm into charts at the moment, a chart in my notebook between learning a language, acquiring a language, the natural acquiring process, curiosity, I want to communicate, the difference between learning to read with you have to know this literature and these quizzes and homework, all that stuff that's about learning as opposed to acquiring. And so then how do we help kids acquire a reading and writing habit?
Well, there's two words that jumped out at me when you shared that beautiful notebook entry. Number one was play,
Mm-hmm.
and number two was joy. And I think right now, I think with the stress we're all experiencing, those are two really important things. If they're important for us, they're certainly important for our students to be finding the play and the joy in reading and writing. And I think the element of it, it's really interesting. I think in our own different ways, although they're very, very different, my notebook to me and your notebook to you is really an exercise in self-care.
It is.
And it's really an exercise in having a place to release a little bit. And so maybe that then serves as a nice transition for who we're going to have on tomorrow.
Yeah, Chris Crutcher is joining us. So I learned about him through the back or the first page of Voices from the Middle when Kylene Beers was the editor, and he wrote this essay at the start of every one of those 6 years she was editor. And it was always a story of one of the students he was working with. So he's going to join us. And what we're hoping to kind of tease out of our thinking with him is what is social emotional learning and care now and for kids, and one of his current projects that he's working on.
So maybe say a little bit more about his background too.
Right.
Besides
A
being a
child
young
adolescent therapist for decades. And that's where all those stories came from, and a young adult novelist. I've got to get the number from Bob Probst, but He was had more novels in the top 100 than I can't remember how many other novelists. He's just prolific and interesting as a writer. But I'm more interested in teasing out from him what he learned and all that work with kids.
And so tomorrow we'll have that discussion of what we
Yeah,
should be thinking about to raise healthy kids and healthy teachers during this interesting time.
absolutely. And if you want to join us on Flipgrid, we'll put a post up.
Yep, sounds good. Well, good to see you, and good to see
Good to see
everybody
you.
else out there, and we'll see you all again
Right.
tomorrow.
Bye, you
Be well.
guys.